The glass didn't fall. It flew. One sharp flick of a small wrist, and a wave of cranberry red burst through the air, splattering across my cream dress like a violent signature. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the room. Then laughter, quiet at first, then louder, rolled through the hall like a cruel tide. It was my son's wife's birthday. Chandeliers glimmered, the table glittered with silverware, and everyone looked perfect, until the stain appeared on me. Serena, my 16-year-old niece, stood with her phone in hand, pretending innocence. "Oops, sorry, Aunt Lila," she said with a sugary smile. Her mother, Naya, chuckled beside her, the kind of laugh that isn't amusement, it's victory. I could hear my heart thudding in my ears. I smelled champagne and perfume and the frosting from the cake, everything sweet enough to make the moment feel sour. My son, Ethan, didn't even look up. He adjusted his jacket, whispered something to a friend, and kept eating as if his mother wasn't standing there dripping red humiliation. Someone whispered, "Poor thing, she always takes it too seriously." Poor thing. That phrase had followed me for years. When my husband died, when I lost the house we built, when I moved into that little apartment with thin walls and thinner savings. Poor Lila. But poor Lila was the one who paid for the house they live in, the one who co-signed their business loan, the one who kept silent because silence was cheaper than confrontation. I smiled. Not the kind of smile that forgives, the kind that memorizes. I dabbed at my dress with a napkin, each press like a heartbeat. "It's fine," I said softly, though my voice felt like glass scraping the floor. "Accidents happen." Naya tilted her head. "Oh, don't be dramatic, it's just juice. Just juice. Just disrespect." Just another reminder that in this family, I was the background noise, the woman who gave everything but didn't belong anywhere. The music started again. Laughter filled the air. People returned to their plates and conversations, but I stayed still. Inside me, a quiet decision formed, not loud, not angry, but solid as stone. I wasn't going to cry in the bathroom this time. I wasn't going to disappear early like I always did. Tonight, I would finish the evening exactly as expected, graceful, calm, invisible, and then I would do something no one in this room would ever expect. From my corner, I studied their faces, the people I'd loved, raised, and rescued. Ethan's expression was the same tired mix of embarrassment and convenience, the look of a man who saw his mother only as an obligation. Naya's laugh was bright, rehearsed. She lived for attention, even if she had to buy it. And Serena, a mirror of them both, watched me, waiting to see if I'd explode. She'd learned cruelty like a language, fluent and effortless. But I didn't speak that language anymore. I looked down at the stain again, deep red, almost elegant now that it had dried. I traced its edge with my fingertip. "Thank you, Serena," I said quietly. She blinked, confused. "For what?" "For helping me see clearly." I left before anyone could answer. My heels clicked on the marble floor, steady, not rushed. Behind me, the music swelled, the party roared back to life, and nobody followed. They'd think I was sulking, fragile, harmless. That belief was my final gift to them, ignorance wrapped in arrogance. Outside, the night was cold and beautifully silent. I sat in my car for a long time, the city lights trembling on the windshield, and let the laughter from inside fade into memory. My reflection in the mirror looked older, yes, but not weak. I saw something sharper in my eyes, something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. They thought the story ended with a ruined dress. They were wrong. Because that night, as the stain dried against my skin, I made a promise, to myself, not to them. I would never stand in that room again as the woman they could laugh at. And by the time the sun rose, every single person who had mocked me tonight would remember this stain, not as a joke, but as the moment everything began to change. They thought they poured a drink on me. They didn't know they'd awakened something that doesn't forgive quietly. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of my bed, the ruined dress folded neatly beside me, and listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room. The sound was the only proof that something in my home still worked. Everything else, my patience, my faith, my place in that family, had stopped long ago. I just hadn't admitted it. For years, I'd lived like a backup plan. When Ethan's first business failed, I mortgaged my savings to pay his debts. When Naya's store caught fire, I lent her enough to rebuild. When they needed a co-signer for the house, I didn't hesitate. I told myself, family first. But family never put me first. I wasn't their mother, not really. I was their safety net, stretched so thin that I barely remembered what it felt like to stand tall. I used to think love was measured in sacrifice, that the more you gave, the deeper the bond became. But sitting there, with that deep red stain staring back at me from the fabric, I finally understood. I hadn't been giving out of love. I'd been giving out of fear. Fear of being unwanted. Fear of being alone. Fear that if I stopped helping, I'd stop mattering. The truth hit me like cold water. Every favor, every dollar, every time I'd swallowed their disrespect, it wasn't kindness. It was desperation disguised as loyalty. I'd mistaken dependence for connection, and in return, they'd mistaken my silence for weakness. As the hours passed, my thoughts sharpened. I thought of the birthday parties I'd attended where my name wasn't even written on the cake. I remembered sitting at Christmas dinners, watching everyone unwrap the gifts I'd paid for, and pretending not to notice that my own present was always an afterthought. I remembered the way Naya's friends would glance at me, whisper, then laugh, like I was some relic who didn't belong in their glittering little world. And worst of all, I remembered Ethan, my son. The man I had raised alone after his father died. The man who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard when he was little and say, "You're my hero, Mom." When did that boy disappear? When did he learn to look at me as if I were an inconvenience? Maybe the day he realized I'd never say no. That realization burned. But underneath the ache was something else. Something cleaner. Freedom. Because if love had turned into duty, and duty had turned into humiliation, then letting go wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I got up, opened my old file cabinet, and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in years. It was thick with documents, loan agreements, mortgage statements, payment receipts. Proof of every favor I'd ever done. Proof that I was the one holding up their empire of comfort. Each page was a memory they'd forgotten, but my heart hadn't. I spread them across the table like a map of my mistakes. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. This was something colder, steadier. Resolve. For the first time in years, I saw clearly what I had to lose, and what they stood to lose if I ever stopped pretending. Their house, their comfort, their lifestyle, their easy laughter. All of it stood on a foundation I built and never got credit for. And maybe that's why fate gave me that moment at the party. Maybe humiliation was the only language strong enough to wake me up. I poured myself a cup of tea and stared at the stain on my dress one last time. It looked darker now, almost black under the kitchen light. I traced the edge with my finger and whispered, "You're not a stain. You're a signature." A mark that said enough. Because from that night forward, I would stop being the soft answer. I would stop cushioning their mistakes. I would stop begging to belong in a home I built with my own sacrifice. They thought they could laugh and move on. They thought I'd forgive, like always. But what they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that I had finally remembered who I used to be before fear took over. A woman who could change everything with one decision. And that decision had already been made. It's strange how memories can wound long after they should have healed. That night, after the laughter faded from my mind, old moments began crawling back. Every favor, every sacrifice, every smile that hid exhaustion. I had built their comfort brick by brick, but not one of them ever wondered what it cost me. The first time Ethan asked me for help, I was 58 and still mourning Daniel. My husband had been gone barely 3 weeks when my son showed up at the door, eyes red, voice trembling. "Mom, I hate to ask, but my business is falling apart. If I don't cover payroll this week, I'll lose everything." His voice cracked the same way it used to when he was a boy and scraped his knees. I didn't even think. I just wrote the check. It wasn't a gift. It was a wound wrapped in love. He promised he'd pay me back in 2 months. 2 months turned into 6, then a year, then never. Each time I hinted at repayment, guilt found me faster than his excuses. "Mom, you know I'll fix it," he'd say. "You're my only real support." I mistook those words for affection. I didn't realize they were shackles. When Naya came along, things got worse. She was all charm and ambition, the kind of woman who could make an apology sound like praise. She'd kiss my cheek and say, "You're such a blessing, Lila. We couldn't do any of this without you." I believed her, until I saw the way her eyes hardened whenever I asked to be included. The first Christmas after they married, I paid for everything. The tree, the gifts, even the dinner. They promised to reimburse me after the holidays. They never did. The year after that, they invited me again, but when I arrived, there was no seat for me at the main table. "Oh, we didn't know you were staying for dinner," Naya said with that polished laugh of hers. "You can sit near the kitchen if you like. It's warmer there." I sat near the kitchen, and I smiled. Because that's what you do when love turns one-sided. You smile, pretend it doesn't hurt, and pray that pretending counts as peace. Every favor I did became another invisible thread around my neck. When Ethan wanted to upgrade their house, he called it a small co-signature favor. I spent 2 nights reading the contract, trying to understand every line. He told me not to worry. "It's just paperwork, Mom. It's formality." But formality became a mortgage. And the mortgage became my burden. When they remodeled the kitchen, they didn't even invite me to see it. I found out through social media. Naya, smiling under new lights, captioned "Our dream finally real." "Our dream," she said. "Not hers. Not mine. Ours." But I was nowhere in that picture. I had worked 2 part-time jobs that year just to keep up with my part of the payments. My hands were raw from cleaning offices at night, but the house I helped save didn't have room for me at the table. The next year, they needed money again. "Just a small shortfall," Ethan said. "You'll get it back before tax season." I told him no. For the first time in years, I said no. His voice turned sharp, unfamiliar. "You've changed, Mom. Dad would have never let family struggle." I still remember how those words cut. They used my dead husband as a weapon against me. I didn't reply. I just nodded, like guilt was the price of survival. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't changed. I had just begun to see. I saw how they called me only when they needed something. How birthdays and holidays always came with a question attached. How every "we love you" was followed by a request. It wasn't love, it was convenience. They never said thank you when I worked double shifts to cover their missed payments. They never asked how I was managing on my own. They never wondered why I'd lost weight or why my eyes stayed tired. They didn't see me as a person anymore. I was a card to swipe, a cushion to land on, a resource to use and forget. And the worst part? I allowed it. I thought if I gave enough, they'd finally see me. But the truth is, people who take without gratitude never learn to see the hands feeding them, they only learn to expect more. That realization was brutal, but it was also cleansing. Because once you see how people treat you when your silence benefits them, you stop confusing their comfort with your worth. So that night, sitting in the quiet glow of my kitchen lamp, I made a vow. No more forgotten favors. No more invisible sacrifices. No more pretending that exploitation was love. If they could forget everything I'd done for them, then I could forget the part of me that still wanted their approval. And from that moment, I began to remember who I used to be, before I became the woman who said yes to everyone but herself. Sleep didn't come that night. The silence in my apartment was so sharp it almost hummed. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, whispering like something that already knew what I was about to do. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by piles of papers, contracts, receipts, transfer slips, and bank letters, proof of every time I had chosen love over logic. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I stared at the last page in my hand, the loan renewal Ethan had promised to handle. My signature sat there, perfect and trusting, right beneath his name. I traced the ink with my finger until I felt the paper tremble. I wasn't trembling, it was. The guilt, the exhaustion, the disappointment pressed so heavy on that paper, it almost vibrated. I closed my eyes and saw their faces, Ethan's proud, Naya's smug, Serena's mocking. All of them so sure that I'd never change. So sure that I'd keep paying, keep forgiving, keep disappearing. For years I had believed that silence kept peace, that kindness meant endurance. But that party, the laughter, the stain, the camera, showed me what peace really was, a cage with velvet walls. And that night, I decided to step out. I didn't want revenge. Revenge is fire. It burns quick and leaves ash. What I wanted was colder, cleaner, justice. I wanted balance restored. I opened my laptop, the screen's pale light washing over the documents spread around me. I knew every number, every clause, every date. 4 years, I'd signed papers without hesitation. Tonight, I would read them line by line, not as their mother, but as the woman who co-signed their comfort. The truth was simple. They were living on credit, mine. Every luxury in their lives was built on my name, my record, my sacrifice. Without me, their entire structure would collapse under its own arrogance. It wasn't malice, it was mathematics. I wrote 3 letters before dawn. 1 to the bank, 1 to the mortgage company, 1 to the attorney who had handled Daniel's estate. My request was direct. Initiate review and withdrawal of my liability as co-signer on all active loans tied to Ethan and Naya Dupree. I read it twice before signing my name again, but this time, it wasn't submission. It was liberation. As the printer hummed, I felt a strange calm spread through me. The kind that comes after you've been underwater for too long and finally reach the surface. The air hurt a little. It always does when you start breathing again. When morning came, I dressed slowly, like I was suiting up for battle, but not the kind that draws blood. I chose the same cream blouse I'd worn under the stained dress and pressed it neatly, the last trace of humiliation gone from its fibers. At 9 a.m., I walked into the small law office downtown, the same one Daniel and I had used for our will 20 years ago. The receptionist smiled politely, and for the first time in a long while, I looked someone in the eye without shame. I need to review some old contracts, I said. And I need them updated. Mr. Green, the lawyer, was older now, his hair silver instead of black. Lila, he said, recognizing me immediately, I remember your husband. Good man. What brings you here? I smiled faintly. Closure, I said. We spent 2 hours going through the papers. Every clause, every percentage, every obligation that tied me to their debts. Each one was a quiet confession of how I had traded power for peace. When he asked, "Are you sure you want to do this? It could lead to foreclosure if they can't manage payments," I didn't hesitate. They've been living on a borrowed life, I said. It's time they learned to earn it. That afternoon, I sent the documents off, certified, sealed, irrevocable. And as I slipped the envelopes into the metal mailbox, something extraordinary happened. I didn't feel fear. Not guilt. Not anger. Just an immense stillness, as if the world had been holding its breath with me all these years and finally exhaled. That night, I slept for the first time in months. Deep, dreamless, peaceful. In the morning, I made coffee and opened the curtains. The city looked different. Not brighter, not softer, but real. 4 years, I'd walked through my life like a guest in someone else's home. Now, every breath, every sound, every ray of light felt like mine. It wasn't just a financial decision, it was a spiritual one. I had stopped trying to fix people who didn't want to grow. I had stopped feeding mouths that bit the hand that fed them. I had stopped calling captivity love. And somewhere deep down, I knew, when those letters arrived, the laughter from that party would echo again. But this time, it wouldn't be mine they laughed at. It would be theirs, fading into silence as the reality they'd built on me began to crumble. They thought they'd buried me under guilt. They didn't realize I was planting something stronger. Freedom. The first phone call came at 7:12 a.m. sharp. My ringtone sliced through the stillness like a siren. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. I just let it ring, once, twice, 3 times, then I answered. Mom! Ethan's voice cracked. Frantic. What the hell did you do? I didn't answer immediately. I stirred my coffee, let the silence stretch, then said softly, Good morning to you too, Ethan. Don't play games with me, he snapped. The bank called. They said you filed a co-signer withdrawal. They're giving us 30 days to requalify. Why would you do this now? Now, I repeated, setting the spoon down gently. You mean after 4 years of waiting? After every promise, every next month, every excuse? This isn't the way, Mom, he shouted. You're going to ruin us. I almost laughed. Ruin us. The words hung heavy. They'd ruined me long before today, with every unpaid debt, every mocking smile, every time they pretended my sacrifices were obligations. Ethan, I said quietly, you're 34 years old, married, a business owner. You don't need your mother's signature to prove you can stand. He went silent for a moment, then his tone changed, pleading now. You don't understand, the timing's bad. We have pending shipments, Naya's store relaunch next week, just give me some time. I took a slow breath. You've had time, I said. Years of it. Before he could reply, I ended the call. Not in anger, in peace. The kind of peace that comes from choosing truth over comfort. But peace doesn't last long in a family built on panic. At 9 a.m., the second call came. Naya's name flashed across my phone like a warning. I let it ring twice before picking up. Lila, she said, her voice sharp and shaking, do you have any idea what you've done? My landlord just called. He said our lease guarantee is under review. He's freezing access to the storefront until financials are verified. I could lose everything. You mean, I said slowly, the store I financed? The insurance you never renewed? The one you said was handled? Her breath hitched. This is cruel. You're acting like a stranger. No, I replied. I'm acting like someone who finally read the fine print. There was silence, thick, dangerous silence, then she hissed, You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. No, Naya. I already regretted trusting you. This is the part where I stop. When she hung up, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just space, empty, quiet, wide space where fear used to live. By noon, I knew the third call was coming. And it did. This time, the voice was small, trembling, Serena. Aunt Lila, she whispered. They're fighting. Dad's yelling, Mom's crying. The banker came to the house. Everyone's blaming me for what happened at the party. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw her face that night. Smug, laughing, holding the phone high. But what I heard now wasn't arrogance. It was confusion, regret, maybe even shame. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I said softly. They're angry at themselves, but it's easier to point at someone else. She sniffled. Dad said you're trying to destroy us. Are you? I paused, then said the truth. No, Serena. I'm trying to save you from becoming like them. Her breath caught, and before she could reply, I said, Tell your father I love him. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's slavery. Then I ended the call. The rest of the day passed like a storm breaking in slow motion. Emails flooded in, notifications, alerts, inquiries. The mortgage company confirmed receipt of my withdrawal. The legal advisor acknowledged the update. The chain reaction had begun. At 6 p.m., Ethan came to my door. Not the confident son who once mocked my simplicity, but a man whose walls had started to crack. His eyes were red, his hair messy, his voice trembling between anger and fear. You blindsided us, he said. Do you even care what happens now? I looked at him carefully, measuring every word. Yes, I said. I care enough to stop letting you fail with my help. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. Without your name, we can't qualify. The bank wants a complete revaluation. If we lose the house, I interrupted gently, then you'll find another one. Smaller. Honest. Yours. He shook his head in disbelief. You're not the woman who raised me. No, I said quietly. I finally became her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked at me as though seeing a stranger, but I saw something else, a child meeting the consequences of adulthood for the first time. He left without saying goodbye, and when the door closed, I didn't collapse. I stood there, breathing steady. I didn't need revenge anymore. Watching truth finally reach them was enough. Outside, the evening settled like dust after an explosion. The city lights flickered on, indifferent, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. They would have to face the world they built on borrowed strength. And for once, I wasn't part of the debt. They used to say I was too quiet. Now they'd learn what silence sounds like when it finally speaks. The storm began quietly, like most disasters do. It didn't come with thunder. It came with an email. Urgent, requalification notice, the subject read. The bank's words were clean, formal, merciless. Ethan and Naya had 30 days to prove they could sustain the mortgage on their own. Failure to comply meant termination and foreclosure proceedings. The line at the bottom read, per co-signer withdrawal by Ms. Lila Dupree. They must have read that line 100 times. By the second week, their confidence had cracked. The cars stopped leaving the driveway as often. The once busy boutique went dark for inventory maintenance. And every night, their porch lights flickered long after midnight. Fear doesn't sleep when the truth comes due. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't ask how things were going. 4 years, they'd relied on my voice to patch their mistakes. Now, they would learn to hear silence as consequence. One evening, I came home to find a letter slid under my door. No stamp, no address. I didn't need one. It was Ethan's handwriting. Mom, please. It began. We're drowning. Naya's breaking down. The bank wants statements I don't have. I know you're angry, but don't let us lose everything. We'll make it right this time. I sat down, the paper trembling in my hands, and for a moment, guilt tried to sneak back in. That old familiar ache. You're his mother. But then I remembered the countless times I'd sat in the dark, wondering how I'd pay my bills after covering theirs. I remembered the laughter at the party, the humiliation that had finally stripped the illusion of family from my eyes. I folded the letter and set it aside. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Because sometimes mercy isn't giving someone another chance. It's letting them finally face the life they've created. A week later, I got another call. This time from the investor on Ethan's board. His tone was calm, measured. Ms. Dupree, I wanted to thank you, he said. Your earlier report helped us identify financial inconsistencies. We've stepped in before things got worse. Are they cooperating? I asked. They're panicking, he said honestly. But sometimes panic is the first step toward accountability. That night, I stood by the window as the rain began to fall, streaking down the glass in thin, silver lines. Somewhere across the city, I imagined Ethan at his desk, head in his hands, realizing that the safety net he'd always counted on was gone. And for the first time, I didn't pity him. I respected him enough to let him grow. The next day, Naya appeared at my doorstep. She looked nothing like the woman who once dripped diamonds and arrogance. Her hair was tied back messily, her voice raw. "Please, Lila," she whispered. "The landlord froze our lease. My business is dead. I just need a little help to get through this month." Her eyes searched mine for the old softness, the one she'd always manipulated. But that softness was gone. "I warned you, Naya," I said quietly. "You built your empire on borrowed ground. And borrowed ground always sinks." Her face twisted, first in anger, then in desperation. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I shook my head. "No. I'm surviving it." She left without another word. The rain had turned into a downpour, her figure blurring behind the curtain of water as she walked away. By the end of the month, the letters stopped coming. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. Then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. I hesitated before opening it. It was Serena. Her eyes were swollen, mascara streaked across her cheeks. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Dad says we might lose the house," she said. "Mom blames you. But I know it's not your fault. I saw the papers. They were using you. I just didn't know how to stop it." I reached out, brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, and said, "You don't have to fix what you didn't break, sweetheart." Tears rolled down her face. "They said you ruined everything." I smiled softly. Maybe I did. But maybe everything needed ruining. She looked at me, confused but listening. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes," I said, "you have to let things fall apart so the truth can stand on its own." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 generations of women finally seeing each other clearly. When she left, I didn't watch her go. I just stood there, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste like guilt. It tasted like rain and freedom. Across town, the bank would make its decision soon. Maybe they'd lose the house, maybe they wouldn't. But one thing was certain, they'd never look at me the same again. Not as their backup, not as their savior, not as their victim. They had finally met the version of me that had always existed beneath the apologies. The one who understood that justice doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from peace. And that night, as the rain quieted and the world settled, I whispered to myself, they haven't lost everything, only the woman who kept saving them. 3 months later, everything had changed, but not the way they feared. The house on Cedar Lane still stood, but it no longer belonged to them. They'd sold it to cover debts and downsized to a modest apartment near the river. The irony was poetic. The house they once flaunted as proof of success became the price they had to pay for peace. When I drove past it one afternoon, the new owners were outside, planting flowers in the garden I had once watered. I didn't stop. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt closure. Some things you don't lose, you release. Ethan found a smaller home. Naya reopened her boutique in a rented space with proper insurance this time. Her glossy perfection had faded, replaced by something real, humility. Even her social posts looked different now. No champagne, no filters, just work. Maybe, finally, she understood the cost of pretending. And Serena, she changed the most. She started visiting me on weekends, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help around the house. The girl who once laughed at my stained dress now sat beside me, helping me paint the kitchen walls a soft yellow. One day, while we painted in silence, she said quietly, "I didn't know people could break you while smiling." I looked at her, heart aching. "They can," I said. "But the beautiful part is, you can rebuild while smiling, too." She nodded, tears threatening to fall, and whispered, "Dad's different now. He works hard. He doesn't talk about success anymore. He just tries." That word, tries, was enough. Sometimes life doesn't give you miracles. It gives you lessons disguised as endings. I never wanted revenge. I wanted recognition. Not for the money or the sacrifices, but for the love I gave, the kind that deserved to be seen. And maybe that's what true justice looks like, not watching others fall, but watching them finally learn to stand. I used to believe love meant never saying no. Now, I know the opposite is true. Real love has limits. It protects both sides. It doesn't beg to be respected. It teaches respect by living it. In those quiet months, I rebuilt my world one day at a time. I turned Daniel's old study into something new, a small design room where I helped women like me start over. Women who'd been overlooked, used, or dismissed. Some came with broken hearts, others with broken credit scores. I helped them organize, rebuild, and reclaim their lives. I called it the Second Start Project. One woman cried when she held her new business plan and said, "I thought my story was over." I smiled and told her what I had finally learned the hard way: no story ends until you decide to stop writing. Now, when I walk past mirrors, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor who found strength in silence and courage in clarity. I see a woman who learned that power isn't loud, it's steady. And peace isn't something you find in others, it's something you protect within yourself. I keep the red-stained dress in a box at the back of my closet, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of transformation. That night used to represent everything I'd lost: respect, dignity, family. But now, it stands for everything I gained: awareness, freedom, and self-worth. Sometimes destruction is just another word for rebirth. When people ask me if I miss them, the laughter, the gatherings, the noise, I tell them the truth: I miss who I thought they were. But I love who I finally became. And when I sit in my garden now, sipping tea as the sun sets over the quiet street, I feel something I never used to feel in that big house full of noise: peace. Never confuse sacrifice with love. Love without boundaries becomes slavery. True strength isn't loud. It's choosing dignity when silence hurts more than words. Family isn't who you help most. It's who respects your help the most. When people laugh at your pain, let them. One day they'll remember that moment as the day they lost your silence. The moment you start respecting yourself, the world changes how it sees you.